We are getting closer and closer to a Vue 3 release, and I think what I'm most excited about is just to see how other developers embrace and use it. One of my favorite new features coming in Vue 3 is the Composition API. This offers us an alternative but different approach to creating components and composing functionality. So I've given a couple talks on Vue 3 now, and I think the one question that keeps coming up is, when do I use ref versus reactive to declare reactive state within my components or my composition functions? So I never really had a great answer to that. So I set out, did a little research, and I think I have a pretty good answer to that question now. So in this tutorial, we'll take a look at ref versus reactive and when you should use one or the other. And we'll do it right after this. All right, so we're going to get started here, and we're just going to create a new project in Vue 2 using the Vue CLI. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at how to create some reactive data in Vue 2 really quick, just so we can kind of cover a point. And then we'll add Vue 3 into this project, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the Composition API and try to figure out when we should use ref or reactive. So I just want to mention, I do have an article on this. If this might be very meta if you're watching the video in the article, because after I post the video, I usually include it in the article. So that could get kind of crazy, but if you're not, if you're over on YouTube or watching this video wherever, I do have an article on this over on my blog at danvega.dev, so go ahead and check that out. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go Vue create. We're going to say Vue 3 ref reactive. And I'm going to say -b. I just want to bear project. And we're going to pick the defaults and just let it do its thing. All right, so here I am in app. I'm actually just going to start with a new Vue. So let's just say that we had a template here and we wanted to display a title. So we would come in here, we'd start with title. And we know that in Vue 2, you can't just do something like this, right? You can't just say const title equals hello world and expect this to work, right? Like, this is not going to be returned to the template. This is not going to be reactive. So instead, what we need to do is we need to declare this in a particular place. There is a convention here, right? So we need to create a data function, and this function is going to return an object. And in that object, we will, I'm going to bump that up a little. In this object, we will go ahead and return a property called title. That title has a string of hello world, and that property is now reactive. And the way this works is Vue underneath the hood will look at your the return object from the data function and take each one of those properties and convert them over to getters and setters using object.defineProperty. So the point I want to make here, which all of you probably already know, is that you just can't declare data anywhere. There is a convention here. And so that kind of carries over to Vue 3. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go Vue add Vue next. And what this is going to do is use the Vue CLI plugin called Vue Next, which basically just adds Vue 3 to this project. Now, this is something that you're not going to do in production. This is strictly just for playing around and testing things out. But it's nice. It enables us to use Vue 3 right in a project that we're familiar with. So as you can see, a few things have changed. Package.json, app, main, and yarn lock. So let's go ahead and clear this. I'm going to actually close this out. Nothing's changed there. If we look in package.json though, we are now using 3.0.0 alpha 4. So now what I'm going to do is, again, come back in here, create a new one. We'll say h1 title. And what we can do here is in the Composition API, our main entry point into using the Composition API is this setup function. And in this setup function, again, there are some conventions. There are ways that you create reactive data. You can't just come in here and say, let title equal hello world and return title. So anytime that we're going to use a function or a variable within our templates in the setup function, we need to go ahead and return that. So we're returning title here. If we were to go ahead and run this, npm run serve, nothing different there. This should load up, and let's move this guy over here, and then look here, and all right, so this works, but this is not reactive. So if we needed to change this variable, Vue is not going to know that, hey, this is a property that you want me to watch for changes on and update the DOM accordingly. So while this seems like it works, it doesn't work. And that's because we haven't told, there's a way to tell Vue, hey, this is going to be a reactive property. So if we wanted to do something like this, set timeout, and we went like this. Okay, so we're just changing the title after maybe a second, right? So if we go ahead and save this and we go back to our template, nothing changes. We don't get that new title updated after a second. And again, that's because we've created a property, we've given it a value, but Vue has no idea that it needs to track this title property and that it needs to be reactive. So if we, I'll go ahead and include some documentation in the description below, but there is some pretty good documentation on the Vue 3 Composition API RFC. And that RFC goes into when you might want to use ref or reactive, but the API goes into what each of those are. And so what I'm going to talk about is just kind of when you might want to use those. So we can come in here and we can say, all right, let's go ahead and create a title. And actually, I'll just leave it as that for now. So I'm going to go ahead and use ref. And actually, let's just do this. Const title is equal to ref, because I'm going to get ref and hello world. And I'm not importing that. I don't know why that didn't import. It usually imports for me. So I'm going to say import ref from Vue. And that should work. Title is a constant. Right. So we'll talk about this in a second. But now if I go over here, refresh, hello world now changes into new title. And I want to talk through this, so let's go ahead and stop this, close this out, and let's talk about this. So the first method that we're looking at here is ref. And what ref will do is basically take a primitive value and turn it into a reactive property. As you saw in the example, Vue knew when the title changed that it should go ahead and update the DOM. And that's because we use this ref method here. And so ref is really great for primitive data types. And so again, back in JavaScript, if we need a little bit of a refresher, those are going to be things like string, number, big int, boolean, symbol, null, and undefined. So those are the 7 data types in JavaScript, and those are, if you need to make one of those particular data types reactive, this is a great start. Now this isn't a silver bullet. This isn't always going to be the answer, but this is usually where I start. And so as you saw, we created a new reactive property called title. We set the value. After 1 second, we went ahead and changed the title, and Vue knew to go ahead and update that. But now I want to talk about this, because this is a little strange, right? This title.value. And why is this happening here? So let's go ahead and log this out. Let's log out title to the console, and let's go ahead and pop in here. Let me bump the size of that up. And we'll go here. And let's take a look at this. Oh, we're not running anymore. So we should run. Okay, let's go ahead and refresh that. And as you see here, you might expect title to be hello world, right? What it actually is underneath the hood, though, is an object. It has a getter and a setter, and it has a single property called value. And that value is holding the value of new title here because we went ahead and changed it. And the reason we are able to change it is because there's a setter underneath the hood. So one, vue knew to track it, but two, vue also called that setter to go ahead and change the value. And so that is the reason that we need to say title.value is equal to new title here. So that's one thing to understand about the ref method. Now, another thing you might ask yourself is why did I use a const here and not a let? And that's, again, because it wasn't a value that's changing. The object itself is not going to change. So I can go ahead and use const. What's changing underneath the hood is the actual value. So I guess that's just a const versus let war that I'm not going to get into, but that's why I used const. Another question is if I'm returning title here, why did I not need to do title.value? And the reason that is because when a ref is returned as a property on the render context, the object that is returned from setup, and accessed in the template, it is automatically unwrapped the inner value for you. So you don't need to append .value here. So that's one important thing to think about. Okay, so that is ref. Let's talk a little bit about reactive, right? When you define reactive data on primitive values, we are going to start with ref. On the flip side, what happens if you want to display an object? Or what if you wanted to use an object and make that reactive? So what if we had a const page is equal to, and then you had things like title and description. What if you wanted to do that? So you could pass that in, you could pass an object into ref, but what it's going to do underneath the hood is actually just call reactive. On the flip side, you can't pass primitives into reactive. You can't say const num equals reactive 0. That will not work. Reactive expects to take an object, and these are key value pairs, right? So it'll look like something like that. So when would you use reactive then? For me, whenever you want to define an object, that's when you're going to use reactive. So we just saw an example of that. Let's go ahead and create an object. Let's go ahead and get rid of all this. And I'm going to go ahead and use reactive. So let's just say that I created something called data, and I'm going to use reactive. And again, this is just a key value pair here. So I might say title is equal to hello vue3. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and return data. Right? So now I could have some more key value pairs in this object if I wanted to. Now the big thing is this isn't going to work as is. Any idea why? As I'm starting this up. So we are returning an object to our template. So that object is data. So if I were to go ahead and say data here, what do you think is going to happen? So we get that entire object. In this case, I want the title, so I need to reference title here. And now that goes ahead and works okay. So I think like when the first time that you see this, you might go, all right, well, this is easy enough. Primitive values, I use ref. Objects, I use reactive. And that seems like it's okay, but it's not always the case, right? because let's take a look at another example. So let's say I started creating that page again. So let's say title. So const title is equal to ref and just an empty string for now. Then I had a description. What if I had a description and I say ref? And then I had maybe some content. So I'm going to create some content, and this is going to be hello world. And then maybe I had a computed property. So I have word count is equal to computed. And then in here, we're basically just going to take the content.value.length. And that looks good, right? So let me get a title in here. Okay, so as I'm starting to create this, now what I need to do is I need to go in here and I need to say title, description, content, and word count. Ref is not defined, so we do that. So far this starts to work, right? All of these things are primitive values. We have a string, we have a string, we have a string, we have a computed property. This all seems like it makes sense, but in the docs for the composition API, it states that you should really start to use ref versus reactive how you would normally write JavaScript. So when I'm looking at this, in a normal application where I'm using JavaScript, I probably wouldn't write all of these properties like this, right? I think in an application like this, I would look at this and go, oh, these are all properties. These are all properties that are related. So I might do something like const data is equal to reactive, and this is an object. And what I might do is take all of these, and let's just do this. Right? So I might do something like that. And now what I could do is I have just this data object. I'm not using ref anymore. And so there we have it. Is that working? No. Content.link, we don't need that. Probably should have just wrote these out. Would have been a little easier. Oh. All right. So yeah, I should have just wrote these out. Trying to convert that to this is not working. Reactive is not defined. Error content is not defined. So the last one is we need to refer to this as data. All right, so this should work. If we look at our title, we have hello view 3. So I just feel like this is the approach that I would take. Is I created 4 different properties for title, description, content, word content. And to me, these are all grouped together, right? These are all part of something like data, or in this case, I would actually call this something like page, right? These are my page properties. And so that's why I grouped them here. And then if I had something that didn't even kind of relate to page, I might just say, hey, foo is actually a ref. And actually, we don't know what that is now, so I can actually use null, right? So then I can go ahead and return that. And that should, oh boy, I don't know why my imports are not automatically getting imported for me, but that is what it is. Data. Okay. So again, just how I would kind of write JavaScript. So for me, the first answer is there is actually 2 stories to this, right? The one that we're looking at now is how would I use ref versus reactive when I'm creating reactive data within my components. And so I hope that that kind of answered that question. If you're using primitives, I start with ref. If you're using objects, I go to reactive. But then I kind of just let it, how I would normally write JavaScript, take over. And in this case, these properties were related. I put them in an object, and I return that object to the template. Again, it's just important to know that underneath the hood, ref will call reactive, but reactive will not call ref. Like, you can't pass a primitive into reactive. So those are the ways that I use them in a component. There's another story here, and that is creating composable logic. So let's go in here and create a new folder. I'm going to call this use, and I'm going to create a new, let's say, use mouse position.js. So I'm going to create a new composable function here, and we're going to say export function use mouse position. And what I'm going to do is actually copy this code from my article and bring it in just so we can talk about this. And I'll need to import ref on mounted and on unmounted from view. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're creating a function that allows us to track the user's mouse. And what it'll do is it'll track the X and Y coordinates. So this is how I might do that. Again, we're talking about ref versus reactive here, so I'm not going to get caught up in the rest of what's going on here. But I know that I have an X coordinate. I know that I have a Y coordinate. So I go ahead and create an X and a Y here. And I use ref because I know they're primitive values. This is a number. Now what I do down here in my function is I return X and Y. So now if I come into app.view and let's just start over. And what I'm going to do is here in my setup function, I'm going to import that. So I'm going to import use mouse position from use mouse. Why am I not getting any help here? That's why, because it didn't put it where I wanted it to. There we go. Oh, having all kinds of fun today. Okay, so now that I have that in place, in my setup function, I can go ahead and take advantage of that. So what I'm going to do is just say const and I'm going to destructure that because I know I get X and Y back. So I'm going to say use mouse position, and that's a function, right? And then I'm just going to return X and Y to my template. Now we don't need to do this in Vue 3, but I don't feel like setting up the prettier rules, so I'm going to wrap this in a div. But in Vue 3, you won't need to do that because of something called fragments. But all I'm going to do here is actually say x is equal to x and y is equal to y. Okay, so now if we go ahead and run this, okay, just a quick note, I had to pause this. I named something wrong here. In use mouse position, it was use mouse position, not use position. So I had a little error there. So just coming back to it, I have X and Y equal to use mouse position. I'm returning X and Y, and I'm going to display those in the template. So now anytime I move the mouse, that is reactively updated. The nice part about this is this use mouse position I can now use in any component. And it just worked for me. I have logic that I can compose into different components. But now if we go back to the use mouse position, and I look at this, I start to think, well, just like back in components, I think of X and Y as maybe like coordinates or positions, right? So I might do something like const position equals, and then I have X is 0 and Y is 0, right? And so then when I'm in here, I might do position.x and position.y. And then when I am in my function, I need to go ahead and return position. So now we're on reactive. Why did I do that? Okay, so now I've set up a reactive object using reactive, and I have this position that I'm going to go ahead and return. So this is where it really matters when you are figuring out if you need to use ref or reactive. Because I did that there, I can no longer destructure this on the way back. So if I destructure this with X and Y, then I'm going to lose reactivity. Furthermore, if I were to do something like this and try to spread use mouse position, I am also going to lose reactivity there. And this is just how this works when you're using reactive and you're trying to, again, it's how the consumer of that function is going to use it. If I need to destructure it or spread it, you're going to lose reactivity. And so that isn't a case. Now you can still use reactive, but we just need to add one little function in here. So instead of returning just the position object, I'm going to return something called toRefs. And again, that should be imported. Yep. So now I'm at toRefs, and I'm just going to pass in the position object there. Now when I come back to my application, my X and Y are working again. And that is because we were able to basically take that object and then create both refs out of every property that's in there. And so that's what's gotten returned back. And now we're able to go ahead and either destructure it or use the spread operator on it. So I think that's where we're going to leave it. Again, this isn't a silver bullet. These are things that you can just consider while you're creating your components or your composition functions. But this is what I read through the documentation and kind of arrived at. And when I started creating components and functions, this was very confusing for me. And I don't think this is the wrong approach, but I don't think there is a right approach, right? And I think anytime something new comes out, it really takes some time until best practices are defined. And for me, this is how I'm going to use it going forward. But I would love to hear from you. How are you using it? Is there a different approach that you're using? Is there something wrong here that I said? So I would love to hear from you if you can in the comments below. Also, if you like this video, please consider hitting that thumbs up, subscribing to this channel, and as always, friends, happy coding.